Hi, this is Gail Brecky, your favorite healthcare contrarian. And the topic I have for you today is uninsured numbers. This is something that has bugged me for quite a while, that so much of how we think about and how we measure or look at the Affordable Care Act relates to the people that are uninsured and looking at the trend over time as to how much the number of uninsured has gone down. But there are, in my opinion, some considerable flaws with these numbers. There are some things that we should talk about and we should do more carefully with regard to these uninsured numbers or insured numbers. And so today I am going to share my screen and we're going to look at some numbers that I put together from a CBO report. So let me get to the right screen here. So this is from a CBO report, and I'll give you the number of that later if you want to look that up. But basically, I've pulled those numbers and made it into a graph. And so here, I want you to keep in mind that this graph represents the entire US population. So I've organized it according to, on the left-hand side in the larger red square, is people that are considered to be insured according to the CBO. And as far as I can tell, that's how everybody characterizes the uninsured or the insured. And so we have in the bigger red box, we have employer sponsored. So it's in the table on the left-hand side of the screen, employer sponsored, Medicaid and CHIP, Medicare, and then we have some other ones that are less common but still considered to be insured. So the Affordable Care Act plans, whether subsidized or unsubsidized, are considered to be insurance. There are some other types of individual coverage that are non-ACA. And then we have some complexity with short-term limited duration plans. There are differences with how these are categorized in terms of being insurance or not, according to how the CBO categorizes. And so we're going to see that a little bit in the next graph. But there's about 200,000 people, this is an estimate, that have these short-term limited duration plans that are considered comprehensive enough that they do consider them to be insurance. And then there are other forms of coverage. So in this outer red box, this is about 311.7 million people out of a total population of 336. And that's where we come up with the number that you might see if you pay attention to the number of uninsured, that there are about 7.2% of the US population in 2023 was uninsured. And this is the usual definition of who is insured and who is uninsured. The other thing I want to point out here is that these numbers in the chart or in the graph don't add up to the 311.7 because there are people that have more than one of these. Probably the most common one is dual eligibles, dual enrolled, people that are enrolled in both Medicare and Medicaid. That's almost 6 million. And then in the wider band or the wider group of all the types of coverage that are considered insurance, there's overlap. There's people that have multiples of these, and that adds up to about 26.5 million. So that's one reason for why these numbers are set up this way. The next thing I want to talk a little bit about is the difference between eligible and enrolled. So let me get to the right page here. And so the reason I bring this up is that we sometimes forget or lose sight of the fact that people who are eligible for coverages have some level of protection. And I think that's worth talking about. So Medicaid in particular is really a form of protection, even if you're not enrolled, because the way the program is defined is that you can enroll at any point in time, and coverage is retroactive up to 3 months in many states. So even if you have a new diagnosis or a new problem and you're eligible for Medicaid but not signed up, you can actually sign up at that time and get coverage and get care. So in my opinion, the people who are eligible but not enrolled in Medicaid should not be considered uninsured in the sense that they are not without protection. They are not without the availability of care should something arise that they need treatment for. Then there's a couple of other categories here, and we're going to get into this a little bit more on the next graph as well. Those eligible for ACA plans can access care relatively quickly after a qualifying life event. So if they have a baby or they get married or there's some other qualifying life event, they can enroll pretty much right away. And in some cases, the coverage may be retroactive to the event. So if you're eligible for an ACA plan and you're not signed up and you have a baby, you can have coverage retroactive to the birth of the child. So that is all taken care of in the sense that you are covered. You're not really uninsured in that case. And then the last bucket is employer-sponsored plans. Typically allow for enrollment within 30 days of a qualifying life event, and those rules can be somewhat different than for the ACA qualifying life event rules. And the rules are going to be different for every employer. ACA rules are going to potentially differ by state. So there are details that are worth paying attention to, but I think it's worth understanding that if you're eligible for an employer-sponsored plan, but you're not signed up, and something changes in your family, maybe your spouse loses coverage, or there's an adoption or a birth or a divorce or something else happens that's a qualifying life event, you can sign up for coverage that will be in place within 30 days of you signing up for that. So it's not as if you always have to wait until the next annual enrollment. So that I would say is another way that people, even if you're not signed up for something, you're not enrolled in a plan, you can have protection and you can have coverage that kicks in pretty quickly in certain circumstances. So let's go to the second graph. So let me bump back to the first graph quickly, just to remind you that we were starting out with this picture that is the entire population. So if we notice, like on the left-hand side, the highest bar is about 161 million people that have employer-sponsored coverage. So what we're going to do next is to focus in on the smaller bars. So I'm going to go next to a graph that is only going to be looking at some of these smaller bars. And so we're going to kind of focus in or zoom in on it to talk a little bit more about some of these other categories. So when we go to the next one, the highest bar on this particular graph, just the way that I've decided to show this to you, is the subsidized ACA coverage. And that's about 14.2 million people. So again, the scale of this graph is very much smaller. We've zoomed way in on the smaller bars in the first graph. So if we pick up where we left off and we look at the categories that are not considered insurance, but are some level of coverage, I'm calling these other types of financial protection. So we talked about eligible for Medicaid or CHIP. That's about 4.3 million. So it's on the left-hand side in the table, and it's also here in the right-hand side. It's this, the left-hand box, it's this tallest bar, eligible for Medicaid. And then we have other kinds of protection. We talked a little bit about the short-term limited duration plans. There's about 300,000 people enrolled in those plans that are not considered to be insurance because the plan is not comprehensive enough to satisfy the definition of insurance according to the CBO. But that is some level of protection. That is some insurance. And then the other one that I think is a really interesting category to delve into and understand better is health sharing ministry. Those are not insurance, but I would consider them to be a fairly strong level of protection, a fairly high level of protection. And that is actually, in my opinion, much more like catastrophic protection, financial protection. And so this category, what I'm calling other types of financial protection, is about 6.3 million people. And then the other ones that we talked about on the last slide were the people that can sign up for something if they have a life event. Particularly, they can get quicker eligibility, quicker coverage. But even if they don't have a qualifying life event and they're eligible for either employer-sponsored coverage or ACA coverage, that could kick in the next time it's annual enrollment time. So they're not totally without any kind of options, any kind of protection. Although, of course, if something happens, there's a bad diagnosis or a bad injury or something that you need care quickly, and you don't have a qualifying life event that allows you to sign up for coverage more quickly, and you have to wait for the next annual enrollment, yes, that could be a long time. So those people might not be protected, or you would consider them to not really have financial protection against those medical costs. So that last category that has the opportunity to sign up annually or more quickly than that, within 30 days or less, if there's a qualifying life event, those people add up to about 9.7 million people. So if you take this more nuanced view of who is uninsured and how big the group of uninsured is, then you actually end up with about 10 million people. That's this last black bar that don't have any of these types of protection, or not eligible for something that could kick in quickly. That this accounts for or amounts to about 10 million people. So I believe this is a valuable thing to understand, that even people who don't qualify for the quote definition of insurance as set by the CBO and other organizations, other people, a lot of the people in that uninsured group have protection. I would consider health sharing ministry to be very good protection for the most part. Again, you have to really understand how that's different than insurance. But I have that for myself, and I would not consider myself to be financially vulnerable to some illness or injury, unless it was just extremely catastrophic, because I have a health share, and that, in my opinion, is really solid and inexpensive and really good protection. So part of what I'm aiming for here is just to promote the idea that we need to have more conversation about what really these uninsured people, what situation they really are in, and to not just assume that everybody who is uninsured, according to how the CBO defines it, is very vulnerable, very at risk. We should be very concerned and wring our hands that, if anything happens, these people are going to be destitute, or they're going to not be able to afford any kind of care. That is not at all the situation for a large number of these people who are considered to be uninsured. So the main point of what I'm trying to get to here is that we really should, as people who take these issues seriously and really want to understand and really want to help people that need help, we really should try and understand and have a more nuanced view of who truly is uninsured and what some of these differences are. So, for example, I think it's kind of a shame to think of all uninsured people as the same and all being very vulnerable, when you have all different sorts of people in those categories. A lot of people who forego insurance that they're eligible for are young and healthy, and I don't think it's wise to consider them to be just the same as perhaps somebody who doesn't qualify for any programs, doesn't qualify for ACA subsidies, but maybe is close to retirement age and they have a lot of very serious health problems and they have been unable to maybe hold a job that that has a benefit, a medical benefit, insurance benefit, and they have, you know, very expensive conditions, or they require expensive treatments or expensive medications. You know, that person is certainly not the same as somebody who's young and healthy and doesn't want to spend any of their money on insurance, or someone who has a health sharing ministry membership and has financial protection that way. So again, I thank you for listening. Please do let me know what you think of this topic. Put comments on YouTube in the comments section, and let me know what you think of this format and this topic, and we will talk to you again soon. Thank you.